I'm Dr. Kim Lannon here with Lou Blasi, who's in a mood today.
I'm not in a mood.
So you're a perfect candidate because you said, you're feeling a little anxious today. And
Yes.
I'm going to say, why?
I don't know.
What's going on? It's a beautiful day out. It's abnormally 65 degrees here every single day.
Just having those things that I used to have, like a little bit of rumination, can't stop the mind.
Good thing you have a psychologist in your life.
Yeah.
You're having some ruminations,
There have been psychologists all through my life, yes.
Yeah, but none like me.
None like you, no.
None like me.
No.
Come on now. Don't ruin my day.
At one point I was doing therapy with a forensic psychologist.
Why? Did you murder somebody?
No. It just happened to be what she did.
Did you need to be profiled for something?
And she ghosted me.
She what?
She ghosted me.
She ghosted you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild.
I think we better have a conversation off air about this.
Yeah.
What do I not know about you, Lou?
Yeah, no, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that's funny, but it's really not. I can't make light of it for you, so we'll have to have a conversation. But, I'm sorry you're feeling anxious today.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Huh.
And then I usually don't get the physical part of it, which is, just all of a sudden you catch yourself with not your heart rate up, but just a little bit tense,
Are you clenching your jaw today?
I wasn't until you said that.
Okay. Well, that's the put it out there suggestibility thing.
Yeah.
Well, you don't look like you're clenching, but I did feel it today. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with you. I'm like, something's wrong with Lou.
No, I'm
Poor
okay.
Lou.
I'm okay because it's kind of diffused. I think it's social actually. Okay. I get a couple things coming up that I'm not really looking forward to. Why?
I'm just looking at you thinking, wow, there's like 17 topics that we could talk about, and they're none of the ones I had ready for today. So we will I'm sure that your
nice
stuff
people, good events, but just I'm not.
Your stuff will leak out into them, and we'll talk about it, and it'll be perfect, and then we'll fix you as we go.
Okay,
all
excellent.
Right. So anyway, good morning.
Yep.
And so our lovely Lou is feeling anxious today, so hopefully I will help relieve some of that. And also, just to follow up last week, look at all the stuff. I don't know if you followed it, but look at all the stuff that came with, the onslaught of Simone Biles being able to put herself out there in the world. She got attacked for it, as you know. But then, of course, people rallied around it because, as I said last week, the whole thing of what's the difference if someone has a medical condition that you can actually see versus something that's physical and psychological in their head. And and I'm very happy to see that after the podcast I did last week, because it was right on the heels of her bailing out last week, so to speak, that people were so critical of the fact that she's a quitter and all these things, and said no, people don't understand, and I stand by this, is that gymnastics is a super dangerous sport. It's not like going out and throwing a football. It doesn't mean that you can't get a concussion, but you're on a 4-inch wide, 4-foot high beam, or you're running bajillion miles an hour at a horse that's stationary. You've got huge PSI on your body when you land. I actually had a dream about that last night for some reason. You've got 2 rails of bars that are fiberglass that you have to swing between and hope to God you don't miss and fall on your neck. I mean, you can break your neck. You can die in the sport of gymnastics. So when you're out there and you do get the twisties, or you get lost in the air, that's a real thing. And people all week long have been asking me all these questions about this, and what does it feel like? And so just for people that did ask me even offline last week, is that the twisties, what it feels like inside is if you have really bad anxiety, but it's not anxious in the air because it's not, but if you have really bad anxiety, the only way I can liken it is if you have ever had that feeling like you detach from your body, like you're outside your body and come back in. It's how you feel in the air, like you don't know where you are. And
you don't have time for that.
And you don't have time to readjust, so you fall out of it. And that's when you see, some of the America's Funniest Home Videos. People go to do some kind of tumbling exercise of some sort, and they'll go up in the air, and you see them come down because they stop in the middle of the air and come down and they land on their neck, and it's funny, haha. But that's sort of an experience of we call it balking. You're balking in the air, that you're not actually going forward with it because you've tapped out. You've checked out of the skill or whatever it is, or in those cases, oftentimes they have no idea what they're doing.
That's a maneuver you have to commit to, right?
And your head has to be in the right space to be able to do that, because on the floor exercise, when you're running, people see it that you're just running into these round off back handspring double twist or triple twist or full in double twist out or something like that. And you actually have to have that split second at the end of the mat where you stop at the corner, right?
Yep.
That's your timing that's where you put yourself in that split second to get your head right to be able to do all of that. And you can run the 3 steps. It's usually 3 or so steps into the round off. And in that 3 steps, you can completely lose it and tap out of it.
Yeah.
And so she, like all of us in gymnastics, have to be so well trained to not do that. But when you have stress and you have pressure and you feel off or something's going on, and it's usually outside pressure, it's not usually something about the skill or because she's the GOAT and she really is, then you have these things that are on you all the time, and it's tremendous pressure. And people were giving her pressure even afterwards, saying like, you quit, you don't quit, this is what you sign up for. I'm going to say it again, just like with Naomi, in tennis. No one signs up in sports to have to perform for the world social media event. They sign up because they enjoy it, they love it. They're little kids, especially in gymnastics and tennis. They don't sign up to become sport commentators. They don't sign up to be news media. They don't sign up to have to do. And by the way, gymnasts aren't making a dime. NBA players are, NFL players are. Gymnasts aren't making anything. Yeah. So there's no requirement for anyone. It's nice that they can stand up and be like, hey, I'm doing great. And Simone's a great spokesperson. She's articulate. She loves doing that part of it. But that wasn't the issue. It was that she had to take care of herself so she didn't die and kill herself, because she could have. People don't realize, unless you've ever been to a gymnastics event, how dangerous it is. So
that's why I hesitate. I have my issues with it. I have my questions about it, but I can't criticize. It's a lot of people were equating it to Tuukka Rask in the bubble in 2020, right, when he just left the team. And it's like, it's really tough, and I had problems with that too, but it's really tough unless you know the actual specifics of the situation.
Right.
Because there are certainly, and with Tuukka, there were certainly family situations that I would leave a team for.
Right.
And you had no details about what was going on. We have no details about what's going on with Simone. And you talk about the physical aspect of it, the danger of it. And that's something I'm not a gymnast. I have no idea what the level of that's like. So I hesitate you can't criticize her. Mm-mm. Because you don't know the story.
Exactly.
But
you're not walking in her shoes.
But athletes and people who follow athletes, do have questions, wonder about it, But you can't, it's hard. You just hold them. You just see how it plays out, because you can't know the specific situation.
Well, and the thing is all the Monday morning quarterbackers out there, right? Yeah. Is that in any sport, but in specifically speaking to Simone Biles and so on, that when I do work with athletes at any level, but particularly because I work with pro athletes and elite level, Olympic level, the issues that affect their performance, like with Simone this time, aren't related to the sport typically. They fall out into the sport that either they can't continue, they have to stop, they have to do something. Like, it's usually pressure from home, finances, media, right? In older athletes, like the men that I see in like the NFL or the NBA or something, they're married. There's family pressure. There's other things going on that are leaking into their ability to function in their day-to-day athleticism. So it's really, people say, well, what's wrong with him? How come his head's not in it? And it's not because of the game or the sport. It's usually, not always, but usually it's because of something else on the outside that's pressing on that creates a problem in the performance. But
athletes for generations have dealt with that.
Right. Yeah. And the athletes for generation have dealt with it, but not always successfully.
Sure.
And because we talked about this last week, that, I grew up in a time where there was, I did have a sports psychologist that traveled with us on the team, and I had access to him all the time. And he was one of the first ones ever in the country, and so on and so forth. And God love him, he's still alive. I think he's like 90-something years old at this point, literally. But he was ahead of his time, and so I had the benefit of having someone around me, whereas a lot of athletes didn't have that. And so it was being addressed back in the 70s and 80s. There, I just dated myself, right? But but nothing like now, which is why when I was 11 years old, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do sports medicine, sports psych, and really be part of this, because there were so many things around, like eating disorders and pressure of performance at a high level and shame and all these other things that it really need to be addressed. And that's in all sports: football, baseball, basketball. It's all, are you good enough? who you're performing for, are you going to follow through, what money's on the line, who's, coach
Right.
feelings. I mean, there's so many pieces of it. And to Simone Biles, what an amazing thing for speaking out for people in their mental health. And our friend here, I was going to address this. Our friend here asked, is there a difference between mental hygiene and mental health? Yes. In the way I look at clinically is that mental hygiene is the actions you take to protect your overall umbrella of your mental health. So mental health is the overarching sense of well-being or not, sense of functionality or not, all the pieces that really encompass what it is. But the mental hygiene is good eating, good exercise, good sleep, good stress management, a social network, healthy around you, all the hygiene factors, like how do you take care of your body on a daily, like, you brush your teeth, you wash your hair. Those are the hygiene factors of your daily life. But then when you're talking mental health, it's all those other things. So hygiene helps you have good mental health. If you have poor mental health hygiene, then you're not going to do as well. Simone Biles has great mental hygiene, which is why she was able to step back and she didn't just keep pushing herself knowing that she could get hurt. What were you going to say?
Well, hygiene is just your daily routines and the way you cope with things that would threaten your mental health.
Right. And I think that with regard to both physical and mental health, is the more preventative you are, which means the more you're aware, the more you know your body, the more you know your mind, the more you know how you work or not, the better your whole state of being, because you'll know when you have to step away. You'll know when, it's kind of like pushing away from the table. You know when you're full.
Yeah.
And some people don't, or so it's the same thing, but people don't think of it the same way. If someone has diabetes, people are like, oh, you have diabetes, oh my gosh, that's so great that you can run a marathon, kind of thing. Or if someone's like, oh, you have mental health issues, what is that? It's got this thing to it. It's like, no, anxiety is like diabetes. It's always there. It just, how do you manage it? How do you take care of it? And sometimes taking care of it is saying, I'm having it right now, I got to back away. You wouldn't have someone jump out on the racetrack or on the field, or if they're in the middle of a diabetic drop.
Right.
It just doesn't work. So why put someone in a position to say, oh, you're just stressed, get out there, what does it matter? No, you don't do that.
I don't think people understand that mental health issues can be transient as well. I mean,
yes.
When we think of health issues, you can have a cold and for 4 or 5 days or a week or whatever, you're going to deal with it and then you're going to move on. It can be the same way with mental health.
Exactly.
You can be struggling with an issue at that particular time that doesn't speak to your permanent mental condition. It's just something that you're dealing with at the time.
Right. Well, and so that's how I explained it in the last week about, I used the diabetes example because people are like, how come she just didn't go back and just do it again? Well, if anyone watched, which I think you did, right? In her vault, I told you last week, I saw where she dropped out because I'm a gymnast, so I know I could see it in the air, right? If you're diabetic and you have all of a sudden a drop in your sugar, for instance, and you're mid-air and you drop and you're weak and you don't just go back and reset. You have to actually have orange juice, a banana. You have to let your body replenish itself. Sometimes, some diabetics can regain 20, 30 minutes later. But most that I know, especially in athleticism, it takes them a day or two to really get their body right. There's no difference in the fact that she knew enough that her mind dropped out on her when she was up in the air because she has so much going on. And I don't know this for fact. I just know that I'm watching it and I can tell, been there, done that kind of thing. And so she knew. And it's like athletes do know this, but it's so much more acceptable for the physical one to be. If someone had said, oh, she broke her leg, it would have been like, oh, poor girl, blah, 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 whatever. No one would have talked about it again. But it's still that whole mental health stigma. And you see the ramp up on TV the past week, Michael Phelps commercials everywhere for Talkspace and all these things for people to, go get help, and there's nothing, shameful about it. And it's interesting because, he's really made a nice space for people to go and do that. You would think that would translate to athletes, but it's just been a boon of criticism on athletes that identify themselves as having this, and then people saying, oh, it's a cop-out. Now, this translates to normal everyday people life in the fact that I get tons of people a year that have people in their lives tell them, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't say that if someone had a broken arm.
Right.
I mean, broken arm is clear. They have a cast. It's one of those things. But there's no different. And so I think that hopefully this will become more and more obvious.
The problem is there are gray areas in that, and there are areas where that works.
Yes.
And coaches have used that to their advantage and used it to the players' advantage over the course of time. But there's a point where it turns into you don't just suck it up and go. Right?
Well,
and people like in physical cases with athletes, usually the line is, are you going to hurt yourself more if you continue?
Right.
That line is less clear with mental health because sometimes the answer is, just kind of suck it up and go. But sometimes that's not the answer.
Well, so
and we talked about it last week. I think
the
the defining
toughness piece is there's a line between having a mental health stress issue that's going to hurt your performance and yourself possibly versus people who tap out or they have mental toughness issues. Athleticism and sport development in youth is great for building mental toughness of being not a quitter. And we're not talking about Simone Biles being a quitter. That's knowing yourself to know to not get hurt. Or, Rob Gronkowski, when no one stuck him back out on the field when he was having issues because he would have gotten hurt physically.
Troy Aikman.
You what?
Troy Aikman.
Right.
Concussions. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, there wasn't a physical thing there,
right.
But he knew he was at a point where there was risk of more injury.
Right.
Yeah.
And not to mention, so I love Nomar Garcia. Remember Nomar?
Sure.
I love Nomar, right? So there, all these things flooded through of historically over time of where people probably didn't realize that there's a mental hygiene health issue going on. Nomar did his rituals on his hands because he's an anxious person playing, but everyone just used that as oh, that's a really cool thing. It's his hallmark. Well, there's a reason why he was doing that. And there's a reason why it was back and forth. That's
ritual. Athletes are big on ritual. Yeah.
Very much so. And so when something's off, when I would vault, like Simone, right, at the end of the runway, there was a very specific way that I would move my feet to get, and you would never see it, but it was very specific that got my head right. There's all these little teeny things that go into it that are mental rituals to have hygiene in your day-to-day life that people don't see because you make it look so easy, or it's just automatic. It's there. It's going to happen. Yep. Tuukka Rask is going to catch every goal. He's going to make sure, while everybody doesn't see what really goes on to make them the star that they are. And that's in your everyday life. Not everyone sees what you do to make your life function. You compare points. Oh, that person doesn't have any issues. That person never does. It's no. Everybody has their stuff. It's just you don't see what it is.
With the Red Sox,
it's not spotlighted because they're not on TV or they're not having to be, the role model of the universe.
With the Red Sox now, Erod is that guy. You can watch the wheels come off on him at a certain point, and coming out early whether he's there or not. And it's not physical; it's mental.
It's mental.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of athletes in the past that don't deal with adversity well. At the point during the contest where they're kind of struggling with what's going on in front of them.
Right.
And like I said, Erod has been a good example of that this year. Sometimes he doesn't have it just coming out, but sometimes he has it, and then there's a little adversity, and you can watch it kind of unravel for him.
Right.
Yeah.
And the benefit of the team sport, going back to what we talked about last week about team versus individual, is hockey, baseball, basketball, football, you can get a replacement. Someone can be put, if there's an issue.
Next man up.
It's next man up, or we just need to take a break. There's none of that for individual sports, swimming, tennis, golf, gymnastics, running, right? You're either in it or you're out of it kind of thing. And so, there's a difference because people, when they're talking about it over the past week or since even the tennis thing, it's that criticism of well, how come they can't suck it up? Well, they don't have anyone else to rely on but themselves, so they have to be their own. They have to be their own self-sufficient working machine. Their coach, their mental coach, their trainer, their parent. Everything has to happen inside to make sure one takes care of themselves. And Carrie Strug, for instance, if you remember her, she was a gymnast back in the day, and she's the one that did the vault and did it on a broken ankle, and she really technically shouldn't have gone and done the second vault, but it won them the gold, right? Yep. It won the whole team for the United States women the gold medal at the Olympics. But Carrie Strug and Bella Caroli were down at the end, and they had a full conversation, and Bella Caroli's thing was basically you can do it, and she had mental toughness, but the coaching situation there with her, and that was pressure, and
Yep.
she did it on, now would she say, I mean, she's done interviews on lots of different ways about, like, should she have done it, not, whatever. I mean, yeah, the end goal was that they got the gold, but to her deficit physically and mentally, she was there, but should she have quit and been criticized? I mean, there's that pressure. If you quit, then the whole team gets, let down. So it's, and people just don't understand it. Again, Monday morning quarterbacking, because everyone's got something to say, but no one has a clue what's going on out there. And the dynamic between Bella Caroli and Carrie Strug, and Marta Caroli, his wife, and Carrie Strug, and all the pressure on performing at that Olympics. I mean, the amount of pressure at the Olympics is so crazy. So crazy.
Simone's performance, the bronze, which not to add to the pressure here, but that would be considered disappointment. I mean, she's the GOAT, right?
I don't think she's disappointed, and the fact that she...
No, I don't know. She is, but...
I don't... I mean, on outward appearance, I don't think she's disappointed. I would imagine there's disappointment. I haven't heard any specific... I've heard criticism about, like, of course, she only got it, maybe she's not as good as she... Yeah. She's the best in the world, period. You see it, there's film, there's footage, it's no doubt. There's, just as, And I think she went back out there just to say, okay, I can do the beam. The beam is the less, even though it's super dangerous, it's the lesser of the speed, injury-prone kinds of things. Yeah, you could break your neck off the beam, but it's mostly right on that surface, and the only thing is the dismount. So do I think she's disappointed? I don't think so. She's a multi-gold medal award-winning, Olympian three times over.
Were there better performances? Was her performance off? Was...
Her performance.
Was it the scoring that we talked about?
Yeah, for her, I mean, from what I saw, her performance, I thought was underscored, but I think that, I can't speak for Simone. I would imagine she doesn't really care. Her point was just to get back up. So
back on the horse, so to speak.
Right. Very good. I see what you did there. Yeah. That was good. But I don't think she really... She has the mental toughness where that doesn't matter. She's not really caring about what anyone else thinks, which is super hard in athleticism. Mm-hmm. It's super hard in day-to-day life of normal people, normal non-athletes.
Well, you get to her level, it gets easier.
Right, so it's like, she went out to do it probably mostly to prove to herself that she could, because she had nothing to prove to anybody else, so I'm sure that she wanted to be able to just do it for herself. And she walks away with a silver medal and a bronze medal, and she's already got gold. She's got endorsements all over the place. No one dropped her. Everyone's proud of her. That matters. The people that have criticism, come to the gym. Let's walk on the beam. That's all I keep saying is, come to the gym. Let's walk on the beam. Let's see how you do at 4 feet high and 4 inches wide and both feet fitting on the beam at the same time. And let's see. Just walking. Yeah. And then, people are like, oh, blah, 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 blah. So it's like yelling at the TV during a football game. They can't hear you. They can't hear you.
Right.
They cannot hear you. So I'm super proud of her. Not that my opinion will matter, but I think that people need to relax a little bit on the whole criticism, because, like you're feeling anxious today. If someone walked up to you and said, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong? You don't have stress. What do you have to be stressed about?" That's essentially saying the same thing. It's like, why? Who are anybody to say that to anybody? And I see that a lot.
Well, you don't tell anybody because nobody cares. Part of the reason why some of my
clients have their issues is because there's not a lot of support. Go ahead.
You don't tell everybody because nobody cares.
Well, nobody cares, but also people that do care enough to have an opinion about it, the opinion is not healthy. Yeah. Because most people, I'm trying to think if that's the right word, many, I won't use most, many people have a negative, toxic opinion about mental health issues. What?
Everything.
Well, that too. Yeah. Well, within the context of this, Lou, there's a commentary about you don't have anxiety. What's wrong with you? I mean, you don't look at my anxiety. Look at what I have to be anxious over, and I'm not even anxious. That kind of thing. Yep. I see that all the time, especially in kids and parents telling, or their grandparents telling them, like, you don't have anxiety. Yeah. I have anxiety. Yep. If anyone should, I should. And I've told you before, I grew up with a lot of that around me of like, you're 10, you have nothing to be anxious over. Yep. Oh yeah, have you walked in my shoes? Well, there's something to be said for an 11-year-old who makes a national team and saying to them they don't have stress.
That's crazy.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Or I broke my arm when I was 8 years old and was told that it didn't hurt. But I had a compound fracture and almost lost it. Just saying.
That's lack of tools. The person dealing with you doesn't have the tools to deal with what it is you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or and there's so many people that walk through life and have those blinders on, like if it doesn't happen to them and it doesn't exist, even though they can see it. It's like, people go over and serve in wartime and in country, and people here are like, oh, out of sight, out of mind, doesn't exist, and someone comes back and no one talks about it because why? Because no one cares and no one understands it. Not to say that no one cares, but you know what I'm saying, though.
People have asked over the years why I did do therapists, and it's just that particular reason, because your group of friends, generally speaking, you can't have these discussions with.
Right.
Because A, you put them in a bad position, B, they don't have the tools to deal with it, C, it becomes personalized to them. It's just not a productive conversation a lot of times.
Right.
So to sit down with someone who has some objectivity and can, just go back and forth with you on it.
When you have a therapist or when you have a doctor that you're working with like me, is I don't have skin in your game. So I can sit outside of it and have lots of generated ideas about how to help you manage your own way of dealing with something without personal investment.
Right. What you're giving me isn't filtered by your own stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, and there's a big difference between the way I work and a lot of other doctors work, in the fact that a lot of doctors, and it is a lot of doctors that I know, that will sit and they won't give suggestions or generate those. They'll just do a lot of how does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? And I think that gets people stuck because it's not solution focused, and a solution focused therapy or solution focused model of life is that you're always generating ideas that get you unstuck from the moment. Because most of the time, and I'm being very general when I say that, most of the time when people feel like they can't move forward is because they haven't generated beyond the one space, because they feel stuck and trapped in their stuff. And so I almost said the other word.
Yeah. That's okay. It'll work.
They get stuck, like that they are held hostage by the moment with no other alternatives. Kind of like when people to the extreme go into like suicidal thoughts, is that they don't think that there's any other way out. And I always say there's 500 different ways out. And clients will say, but I haven't had suicidal issues right now, but it's just like, I've thought of all those, I've done all those. No, you haven't, because there's always ways out.
And I think people live in a predator-prey relationship a lot of the times, where they won't give up a problem or a struggle because they don't feel safe in the environment. Right. People are just going to turn on them, use that against them. And this might be my stuff leaking in more here, but you can't have honest conversations with a lot of people because they'll turn and use it on you.
Well, that's a possibility. So there's a lot of defensiveness, in the environment for yourself, and also that I'm thinking of examples that I've heard in the past week of people they hear you and then they personalize it and start telling you about their experience, and then you override what you're saying, which is the benefit of having therapy, that you don't have that. And if you do have that, that means your therapy is probably not as good as, it's like, oh, this is what happened to me, and your therapist tells you, oh, well, this, you think that's bad, let me tell you about mine. Unless I do have a couple of clients that I've been seeing for years and years and years, and so they know about like several of the recent life experiences I've had, because it's hard not to be a human being and say, oh, by the way, you think yours is bad.
Well, see, that's what's going on here, because it's hard for me to be on the air every day and not let stuff out. Right. And I came to a point years ago where it's like, screw it, it's going out. Right. It's just the way it is.
Well, so that's one of the differences in I've been practicing for almost 26 years. And so there's a difference in the way that I do things, is that if something happens in my life, traditional therapy is you don't tell anybody, you don't act. And it's like, then you're not human, and people don't think you bleed, kind of thing. And that's not normal. But so it's like if someone dies or someone has anxiety, I have no problem saying, like, of course I have anxiety at times. I have performance anxiety, used to. Clearly not anymore.
But to me, that's strong mental health, because what happens is, I think in a lot of these cases, you hesitate to talk about it because you are overly concerned about what other people think about that, what image that portrays, what they pull from it.
Right.
When you're strong in yourself, you don't care what other people think.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm just dealing with this.
Right.
I'm fine. It'll be okay. I'll get it under control, but I'm dealing with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
when you're overly concerned about judgment, and people are very judgmental, you're going to have to live with judgment through your life because everybody's judgmental.
Well, so that kind of like transfers over to another good point that we can talk about is how many people do their lives based on what other people might think, think that they might think, based on the self-conscious nature of how we want to make sure that no one judges us, or no one thinks we're bad, or no one thinks that we aren't good enough, and so you're people-pleasing all the time, looking for approval, looking for acceptance. I mean, that's a huge theme.
To a degree, everybody. But
right.
it's a matter of what that degree is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and so the large portion of anxiety-ridden people that I ever see, which I think speaks to the generalizability of most people who have anxiety, there's often a social component of judgment of, I don't want someone to think, this of me.
Yeah.
I feel guilt, when you hear someone say, I feel guilty. Why? Well, because I don't want that person or them or someone or myself think this of myself. Well,
bringing it back to Simon Biles, even like in a work environment, you don't want people to think that if you're off your game, you're worthless.
Right, because then you worry that you're going to get fired,
right.
or that someone's going to think that you're not good enough, or right. that you should be demoted, or things like that. And I think that when you're I clinically have evidence knowing, not just anecdotal, there's research too, is that the stronger self-efficacy, the self-belief you have in your own self that's not based on other people's judgment or the thought that you have of other people's judgment, you're going to be more likely to be moving up the ladder, so to speak, of your life, because there's an automatic blockade and containment field that comes around you.
Yep.
That with that attitude that you put out in the world that's healthy, people's opinions can be like, oh, well, something's going on, look how strong that person is, versus, oh, they're falling apart because there's something wrong with them, because it's the way that the person's putting themselves out in the world. And not everyone puts themselves out in the world like Simone did.
Yeah.
That's, some people say, oh, that's so weak. No, actually, that is solid, straight on, exactly how it should be. It's kind of like someone dies 3 weeks ago in my life. There's no reason why I can't be able to have like a tear and have someone be like, oh, what's wrong? But that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Well, for me it is. And if you don't like it, well, I'm sorry.
Well, it's
not really.
It's prey behavior. It's like you either act like prey. In
right.
other words, you're worried about all the judgment
right.
that any of your actions
Someone's
bring.
Coming at you. Right.
That's acting like prey. So what you do when you do that is you attract predators.
Right.
When you don't act like a prey, you don't attract
exactly.
predators.
And that's a great metaphor for
yeah.
it, really. It truly is, because, you're not looking... When you look weak and vulnerable...
Yep.
Right? Versus if you are not weak, if you are vulnerable, let's put it that way. If you're vulnerable because something's up, that doesn't mean that something's going to attack you. It's all in the way that you put it out there. And so...
It's coming up with the person who's approaching life with, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think, as opposed to, here I am, and
right.
I don't care what you think. Or, I care what you think, but it's not a priority for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't matter. I'm watching through the window. You seeing my screen jump?
Yep.
So for people that can't see, I got distracted for a second because I've got like a beach flashing behind. It's very pretty, by the way, and then mountains, and then my screen.
A Chromecast connection is a little bit weak this morning.
I'm
apparently.
like, ooh, I'm seeing a lot, so I just have to.
But this is
refocus.
And that comes down to the one of the basics. You can tell me if I'm wrong about mental health.
And I will.
I know you will, because you enjoy it. One of the primary, the cornerstone of mental health is your self-identity, how you feel about yourself.
Yes.
And it's like, listen, I have faults, I have this and all that, but I'm okay,
Right. Well, so that goes back to, are we externalizing versus internalizing? So people will often work on their externals and say, this is what's making me feel bad, versus, okay, when we take all the externals away, it's the internal work that happens, which is, speaking of Freud...
Yeah.
Like long-term
it took us
therapy.
a while to get here, but
right?
yeah, great. Yeah.
So speaking of Freud, but when you're doing long-term therapy, like most of my clients stay with me long-term, like because they end up getting through all their externals and realize that the way that they feel maintained is that they're working internally all the time. And so day-to-day life is life transition, life adjustment, things come up through the year. So they're lifers essentially, or long-term, because they look for coaching essentially through, mental health coaching through their lives that is really on the internal of how to keep the strength of the ego, your reality manager, the thing that keeps you from seeing things correctly versus distorted, rational versus rational, that really comes from an internal sense of self versus the outside, like this is happening to me, this is happening on me, someone else did this, instead of it being like, what do I have in my environment internally to be able to control for me, my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, and then outside of that, there's going to be some pressures here and there, but how do I still maintain myself?
And 98% of the people that hang around you that you deal with don't have that perspective.
Right.
So that's
why they come to see me.
That's been a therapy thing for me for years. It's like you can go in and have a conversation that most of the people in your life aren't capable of having.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Because friends get too caught up in each other's stuff because it triggers them to not. It's not because they don't have boundaries, which is also true. They don't have boundaries, but often it's just that friendships cross over boundaries, and everyone gets triggered by everyone else's stuff, and then they have a shareability, which is great about working, like with the AA groups and the NA. Those are all great groups because there's that overlapping boundary cross in a healthy way of there's a universal shared experience that everyone can talk about for an ism, alcoholism, gambling, sex addiction, eating, whatever it is, that there's an overlapping thing that everyone can share on. But when you need a real objective eye so that you can get your own self-observing eye, you have to be able to have someone that's not a peer, that's not a friend, be able to really look at you and say, hey, I understand it from this perspective. Sometimes personal, but most of the time it's just being like, hey, I get it from this perspective. And you set that boundary for them to teach them how to have a boundary and not let it fall down. Because most of the times there's a lot of most today. Most of the times people who have these issues come up is because their boundaries fall. Yep. Or they aren't able to keep a boundary. Or they don't even know how to set a boundary. Right. When you have a lot of these things. And that, going back to Simone, she set a boundary and people didn't like it. Right. Because people don't like boundaries. And people don't like boundaries because because then they can't get through. They can't permeate. They can't, infiltrate. And we do that. And it's super unhealthy, and that's what families do to each other. It's funny because I would challenge people to list or think about the amount of the people in their lives where they are safe having a conversation. Right. And I've got maybe 5. Mm-hmm. I was working through the list in my head. I've got maybe 5 where I can sit down and tell them anything. They're not necessarily objective, may not have a lot of help, but they're not going to, you're not going to be prey with them. Right. They're going to take care of you. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of who I don't have. Yeah. Right, to go right to them. Oh, not her, not him, not him, it's funny, not her. Funny how often family isn't on that list. Yeah. Oh God, no. Yeah. No. They're the biggest predators of all. Family. Because that's where you learn to be prey. Yeah. Family teaches you how to be prey. Yep. Because it indoctrinates you into your patterns, your role, you're the comedian, you're the scapegoat, you're the hero, you're the something in the family that becomes... You're the screw-up. Yeah. Yeah. You're the black sheep, you're the bad one, you're the annoying one, you're the baby, whatever it is, you've got your label. And so usually in healthy friendships or healthy outside world relationships, that doesn't fall away, but it gets put in check because you have a persona out in the world that changes your dynamic because your social persona, as Carl Jung would say, right? You have your shadow side. Yep. You have your anima and your animus, your feminine and your masculine side that you see. You have your shadow side and you have your self side. You have all those sides. And when you put that out in the world, it's very different than in family life because family life sort of pigeonholes you because usually it's a structural hierarchy. And so that gives you, in social life that happens too, but you have a little bit different control in that. I almost lost it because I saw my screen go off. Did you see that? Yes, I'm right behind you, so I could see it. I know, but I keep seeing it flash. I'm like, my screen keeps flashing. We'll leave it on the pirate ship for now.
But so there are people that you can talk to, but see, therapy rises above that a little bit because there are people that you can talk to, and I have people I can talk to who will always support me.
Yes.
Always have something to say. And they're generally smart or emotionally mature enough people to have something to add.
Right.
Right? So that I can usually get something to add. But for the most part, they're just playing the role of supporting me.
Yes.
Which is great.
Yes.
Because you need that. But the therapist is someone who will support you and give you something useful.
Right. Well, and the role of therapist is
not that the others don't, but
is supposed to. This is my way of doing it. Is you're not just there to listen. You're there to listen and offer not advice per se, but suggestions and ways of getting to a different place in a person's life by guiding them through different alternatives, or generating them and collaborating with a person to do that. Mm-hmm. And if you find someone that can do that with you, that's fantastic, because family and friends typically don't do that. That's, when I walked in today, I was on the phone with someone. I was on the phone with a parent of a client today and talking to them about how they have to disengage from the emotional stuff because they feel like they have to fix it for it's an adult child. And I said, you actually have to ask them, what do you need from me? And usually the answer is, I need you to listen. So that's all that people usually are looking for, is someone to listen to them. I have clients that I sit with and they don't want me to give them any alternatives, and they do fine. They're looking to put it out there, and they're open to having suggestions, but sometimes it's just to listen. Most of the time when you're in your friend groups or in your family, everyone's got to offer advice, and offering advice is usually not good advice.
Talking.
Bad advice.
You know why that's important too, because what talking does is it's processing, taking those thoughts and feelings and emotions and reducing them to words and thoughts. When you have to, especially for someone like me, a writer, where words mean things.
Right.
When I have to choose a word to describe what it is I'm feeling, that's a very important process, because it makes me vet it. It makes me go through it to find the right word.
Right.
So processing is so important. That's why the ability to talk to people, and I'm not diminishing therapists when I say most people do their own work.
Yes.
And how many times have you sat there with someone's talking to you, goes, while I'm talking about this, I'm just thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have that happen probably several times a week, and I love that because they've had a place to just talk, and it's usually in those moments of me being silent, and then they've talked it through, and then they'll say, oh, now that I'm hearing it out loud, saying it to you, I just realized blah, blah, blah. And then I just reaffirm it and say, yep, or I give a little bit extra.
That how do you make you feel is the process of you putting it into words, because that is processing the emotion.
Right.
Because when you're just dealing with it as an emotion, when you're just thinking about it, you're not forced to pare it down.
Right.
So it kind of runs wild.
Right.
But when you have to express it, then you have to come to grips with it, and you become more aware of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the more you become aware of it, the better then the pattern becomes in a strength base, because then you're able to go, oh, now I've changed the way I thought, which changed the way I felt, which then made me have a different behavior, which makes me more aware of it even more, to have it happen again.
Me today, I had these things, and I go, what is it? It's like, oh, I'm a little anxious. All right. And then the question is, all right, why are you anxious? And now that's what I have to go through, for the rest of for the next couple hours until I figure out, okay, that's why.
I bet you as soon as we get off the air and you tell me a hot second of what's going on, I'll be able to tell you.
Oh, I know what's going on.
Oh.
I've already got there.
Oh. Okay, well, that's good. So then I'll help fix it afterwards. There we go.
Right, yeah.
But that's the thing, is that you've already got it, right? So that's a huge point, because many people don't get, and I'm not saying they don't get it. They don't get to that point because they ruminate and they get stuck in the loop of, I don't know. And with anxiety, it's an interesting thing. Because I think it's interesting that so many times I've said in my career to people that I'll say, what are you anxious over? And people will say nothing.
Yeah.
And I'll say, but you're anxious. Yes. Okay, so what is it that you're thinking of? Nothing. Okay, so everyone that's listening, if you have anxiety, you are thinking something. It's not blank. Your brain is not blank. Trust me, it's not. And so, and then it's a very slow process of having to peel that onion away to say, when you're sitting there anxious, there's actually all these thoughts going on. Sometimes it's one particular thing. Sometimes it's 55,000 things. Sometimes it's something from 5 weeks ago that's being triggered now that you're not super conscious of, but it's there. And people, and usually you can get it right down to the moment, but people aren't trained to do that in their heads. So they just swirl. That's what that, you'll hear generalized anxiety. Generalized anxiety is when a person really is more ruminative over like lots of things. They're a worrier about worry, a meta worry about worry about worry.
Yeah.
And so when you say, well, what are you thinking about? And they don't know, it's, well, that's because there's usually like something just happened or something's coming or, there's something there, but the person's just like, I'm just so anxious.
And oftentimes it's just general noise floor, so it's hard to pick out the thing that is stressing you at that particular moment because there's a lot of stuff going on.
And so I stay in the sport mode for everybody because it's very super clinical about the anticipatory anxiety sits on people every day. All people get it. If they don't, they're lying, because everybody has to have a little bit of stress or a little bit of anxiety to get through life. And some of it's really good, healthy, and some of it's really not, like the inverted U I talked about last week, right? You have to have some sense of it. But everyone has an anticipatory anxiety piece to them, and that creates the continuum of where you fall on it to the degrees of functionality that you end up having. And if you don't have the coping strategies as you've been raised essentially from childhood to manage that in a healthy way, you'll bear out to have way more, we talk about physical problems, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, anorexia, eating disorders, all those things bear out because of the underlying anticipatory anxiety that goes unchecked, essentially.
Right. And people have vastly varying degrees of that.
Yes.
For a long time, I was a huge threat generator.
Yeah.
Like everything was a threat.
Right.
And if there weren't threats, I was making them up.
Right. And that's what people do because in order to function without stress or anxiety, that's so foreign. So one has to then be always anticipating, which is the meta worry. I'll worry about worry that I don't have, because if I don't have something, then there must be something to worry about. And if I don't worry about that, then what am I going to do? Because life isn't normal, so I have to worry about that. It's an endless loop. And to be able to slow that train down so you don't crash and burn, right? Never go faster than you want to crash.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
And when your mind gets running like that, the crash is, panic disorder or, overeating or restricting your eating or, breaking out in a cold sweat or having like fainting spells or whatever it is it translates for a person at the extreme levels, or getting the twisties in the middle of the air, right? So
for most of the people, sleep.
Right.
Most of the people that time when you're trying to get to sleep, insomnia. Yeah.
Well, and so good question that people ask me is, why is it at nighttime that I get this? Do you know?
My guess is, I'm not a professional, my guess is that the noise floor drops and your mind is roaming free. You have nothing else to else to deal with but your thoughts.
Right.
So what you do is you deal with your thoughts.
Right. So all day long.
And the mind's going, oh, you're listening to me? Here we go.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why, because at nighttime, all your distractors are gone. All the things that you had to do that kept you away from really looking at or thinking about, or
all the things you use,
right?
Whether it be TV, whether it be alcohol, whatever it is,
right?
All the things you use to distract yourself in that process.
Now are right there in front of you.
Yeah, it's gone. So it's just you and your mind.
Right. And so when people,
which isn't a comfortable relationship for a lot of people.
So that's where you get a lot of times. People will use excessive alcohol because it brings them through that period of time where they know, well, I don't have to sit with myself. And they're not necessarily aware that's what they're doing, but I certainly pointed out. Or, all the times that people are like, I'm going to use Ambien, Trazodone, Seroquel, all the sleep meds. Right, but you're still not sitting with your stuff to be able to really look at it to get through, your sleep insomnia issue that you're having,
that's
or hypersomnia.
That's why depression craves sleep. Sleep is an escape. It's an escape from that moment.
And so people long for the sleep, but then they're so threat generating by the time they go to sleep, they're thinking about 6 hours before, like, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Yep.
So.
Or what am I going to do for the next 4 hours?
Right.
Yep.
And so there's really specific techniques that and it's often dependent. It's not just your thought process. So sometimes people associate nighttime when they're adults, something that happened in childhood at night. So nighttime's hard. I work with veterans that have, been in Vietnam and in Afghanistan and Iraq, who nighttime is a terrible sleep time. And it's the anxiety that comes up because they're anticipating bombs dropping. They're anticipating the threat that's was truly there in their lives. Now they have trauma, so they wait till the morning to sleep because the pattern's now changed. There's some really legitimate threats in their mind that are no longer, but they have created them to be in a pattern that has to be brought down into a space where they can flip back over. Or childhood things that have happened. I've had clients that have had break-ins of their homes and at night, and there's things that usually relate to the anxiety that gets created at nighttime to have those threats come up for a person to generate. Yep. Not always. Sometimes it's just meta worry about worry. What am I going to, simple as, what am I going to wear tomorrow is as big for some people as having anticipatory anxiety of a bomb dropping next to them, and people are like, oh, you'd think, oh, it's funny, right? Because it sounds funny, but the amount of it's the exact same amount of anxiety in the creation in the person, even though it's like, oh, that sounds so silly because it's so petty, but in a person that feels anxious, it doesn't matter. Their reason is their reason.
And it's
so
funny
for
how
one it's a bomb and one it's clothes.
It's funny how you develop your skills and you start to see this in other people. You start to see, it's like, wow, you just see what's going on with them.
Right.
Yeah. And this is, I think, where it's important to separate yourself from your mind and your thoughts. This is, most people swim in their thoughts and think they are their thoughts and think that's their world and who they are. And it's not. My favorite metaphor lately, you're walking your dog. Your mind is your dog.
Yep.
If your dog starts barking and freaks out, do you bark and freak out? No.
Right.
You understand that that's the mind is there to threat generate. That's its job to keep you alive.
Right.
But you got to be able to separate from that.
Well, but interesting that, because when people have out of control anxiety, right, or they have anxiety that they don't feel they can control, because people say I can't control it. Think of that as the metaphor, like it's the dog barking, and you're barking with the dog. You're yelling at the dog. You can't. The dog is running all over the place. It won't stop. It will sniff everything. You can't. That's because you haven't put a boundary to train the dog, your mind, into how do I keep it on a straight line? How do I keep it in check?
Yep.
How do I have it obey my own self, et cetera, because that's what happens. But then it goes to external. I can't stop it because the dog is walking me. Yep. So you see that, and often I'll be running or walking, and if there's a friendly looking person, I can see the dog like leading them all over the place. I'll say out loud, oh, who's walking who, just as a funny thing, but it's true. And I have that whole mental thing in my head of going like, oh, because that gives me a lot of insight as to the fact that that's probably what the household is like.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Because if the dog walker and the dog are having that problem, that means that's probably going on with the kids at home, and there's not a lot of control, and, not always, but these things are just really out in the world and show you a lot about what goes on and how people manage their lives.
But it starts with, if you're walking your dog and the dog freaks out and is scared by something, you don't run. You know, you assess the situation and you come to a more appropriate response to it, and then you try to get the dog in line.
Right.
But a lot of people with their mind, when the mind freaks out, they freak out.
Yeah.
They just go with it without vetting, what the mind is doing, what the threat really is. And,
exactly. Well, it's like when a dog, here we go with the metaphors. The dog gets off the leash, right? Think of that as like your thoughts getting away with you.
Yeah.
Dog gets off the leash. You see sometimes people will like run, and what does the dog do? Runs, right? Instead of stop running and screaming at the dog to come back, you just go, all right, I'm gonna let it happen, and the dog, I'll keep walking, and eventually the dog will come back. Or, but you can see it with people. I see people do this all the time. Their dog gets out, or they get away, and they go, oh my god, and the panic comes up, and they run, and then the dog's like, oh, game, and we're gonna run. So that's like your mind. It's like,
and you're not gonna catch the dog.
If I allow it to run, and I'm gonna chase it, I'm gonna still be in the same position. We're gonna be running all day.
Yeah, you're not gonna catch the dog.
No.
Yeah.
And so, and you see that in what a relatable experience to real life is. This is what happens. And if people could think more in those visuals or metaphors, or seeing it for real life applicable experiences, that this is what happens to your brain when you have mental health issues. That's the other thing I was going to say, because of our friend that asked the question, is people have this stigma around mental health issues. Like there's something bad, like there's, they're going into a psych ward. It's just people have stuff, mental health issues is like someone has medical issues. That's a range of, they have asthma.
Right.
I have asthma. I have a medical issue. that doesn't mean that I'm dying.
Right.
It means they have a medical issue. If someone has a mental health issue, it doesn't mean that they're a schizophrenic axe murderer. It means that they have something going on that makes them either anxious or stressed or depressed or,
right.
Maybe they have bipolar, whatever it is. I was at the airport this past week.
Oh, really?
And I was listening to a father explain to his young sons, they were probably in their 10, 12 range, about someone who has bipolar illness.
Oh, that must have been interesting.
Cringing because he was wrong. I didn't interject, which normally I do, but I was like, maybe in the last couple of weeks, I'm like, I'm tired, I'm off duty. So, but I was listening, giggling to myself, going, this is why they're so misinformed, is he was describing it as, the person's really sick, they could hurt someone, they are psychotic, they're mean people, you don't want to be anything to do with them as a friend. And I was like, ugh. And normally I would have said, well, I'm actually a doctor, and that's not really true. And this, but I was like, I didn't have the investment. But just that one little moment of this father telling his two sons about the friend that has bipolar illness that was not even remotely close set these two people's minds into a set as young people of bipolar's bad.
Right.
And that is not, all I wanted to say is actually it's just when a person's depressed on one end of it and they're really manic and hyper on the other, and sometimes they can't control either side, so they have to have medication or they have to eat certain things or they have to exercise a certain way, and no one's an axe murderer. But the dad was explaining it like that this person is a sociopath.
But there's a wide range of outcomes depending on how well managed the situation
is. Exactly, but this is why, this is the misinformation of the socialized mental health topic that create, back to Simon Biles, is that when you're talking about mental health, when someone says that, it immediately goes to, oh, she's crazy.
Yep.
Oh, she's crazy.
Right.
She's going right in the loony bin. It's like, no, it's just, if there's better words, maybe I can come up with, a different way of talking about mental health issue as a describer.
Well, let's start here. What percentage of people have mental health issues?
Everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. People who are casting aspersions on mental health issues or struggles, people who struggle with things, it just, because a lot of times they do it to create some level of superiority in their mind.
Well, and it also makes them feel better about themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly, it's like, I don't have a mental health issue.
Yeah. Yes, you do.
I'm not crazy. Yes, you do.
I'm willing to bet you do.
You just said that is a mental health issue.
There you go.
Who are you to say that?
Right.
Right. Well, and that's why I think it's so much better that, the stigma just keeps getting knocked down and down and down, because I see every day, I can't think of somebody that I don't know that doesn't have an issue. Everybody has their stuff. Yep. You do, I do, everybody. And if someone says they don't, that's their stuff.
And it's scary how little our society deals with this and should be dealing with it from the beginning. I mean, this is a school issue. I mean, they'll teach you to brush your teeth and eat your vegetables, but they won't teach you how to deal with your own mind, which is probably the most important battle you face.
Well, and not to knock any teachers, because that wouldn't be the point here, is that about...
teachers do what the curriculum tells them to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Teachers don't have that in their wheelhouse. And then the fact that they've introduced it recently in the past decade and a half, roughly, I think, into some school systems that, they're being really savvy on, every hour there's a 10-minute relaxation break, or there's, rooms that are built into the schools now where there's like calm rooms and that you can go and have meditation, not because of any religious thing. There's some of that, but most of the time they're just not built in. When we have research evidence, good evidence, that when kids get a break and have meditative guided imagery or guided relaxation things throughout the day, their production level of their academics and their overall mental health well-being is much better. But schools won't invest in that. They'll invest millions of dollars into a football program, but not 10 cents into, like, let's make sure everyone's stable.
Don't knock
the
football
whole thing
program.
On, like, catching, like, the kids that slip through the cracks, like Columbine and Sandy Hook, and you won't catch everybody in terms of, like, mental health, but people know, and you catch that through, like, watching those kinds of programs being implemented, because you see more than just like, life is passing by fast and kids come in and out of your room and like, little Billy is spiraling out of control because he has ADD that's not medicated. He's probably getting abused at home and no one's watching,
Don't knock the football program.
You what?
Don't knock the football program.
Oh, no, I'm not.
I'm
just saying that they'll put the money into that because that's a generator for the social. Absolutely no. And just like they don't put money into, cheerleading, they'll put money into, it's about equalizing across the board all the programs that really enrich a kid's life. Sport programs, art programs, mental health programs, good, home ec programs where they are teaching like sexual health and all the other pieces that really need to build and round out. Instead of it being so lopsided, they need to have that balance so that it catches the kids that don't have the outlets like sports and all that. Never knocking those programs ever.
Yeah.
No.
It's funny, that meme that goes around in my head. I say this 10 times a day. Some of y'all have never played on a team sport, and it shows.
Yes.
And it's like a lot of society you walk through, people you've never been part of a team. You don't know how to act as a team. You don't know how to act cooperatively.
And I think that goes back to just like, the Montessori schools teach the whole team aspect and the individual aspect out of the academics. If you're not familiar with like the charter school model or the Montessori, it's very much about the nurturing environment of a group and how it stimulates an individual to be successful on their own while being interdependent, which is super healthy, and not being codependent or being stuck in the system as if like the school system's the mothership. It's become not that. It's actually like how to be sharing and cooperative and look to each other so that each individual is successful on their own but still has a group to go, hey, what do you think?
Teams require that.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill Belichick, do your job. As much as it's a team sport, it's one of the primary basics of it is do your job. Do what you have to do. Be good at what you do. And then that's going to be a contribution to the team.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's so you could get that through mental health training in school systems by implementing a mental health program of just, start the morning every day with everyone doing like a 2-minute, let's everyone do like a guided relaxation thing to start the day, or even a guided jumping jack program. Like when I teach my college classes in person, oftentimes right at the beginning of class, because I always get the 1:00 class after everyone's eaten lunch, I have everyone after the first couple of times we meet, like we're getting up and we're going to like move and talk and not sit in the chair. And I've got 30 adults in my room going, what? Yeah, because this is what we need to do to get stimulated so that you're not falling asleep while we're talking.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And if you, but it's coordination of like, yep, everyone's going to do it. And you'll get one, I'm not doing that. Well, you are. Let's do this. It's part of participating. Yeah. But it would be great if they could start that at kindergarten, preschool.
Yeah.
Because it's the team spirit.
I'm going to write a kid's book about walking a dog.
Exactly.
The metaphor of walking a dog, yeah.
Right.
Because, that's a concept that can be taught early, and it's something that should be taught early.
Yes. You should. There's the operative word. Should. should.
Yeah.
So, anyway, bringing it back around before I wrap up. So, I think that the Simone Biles and all the other, I'm sure that all the other examples that will be coming out as examples now, because this has opened the door, hopefully, and maybe for people to really be smart about their mental health. I think it's something for people to really look at this week and this year, and looking at how to take better care of yourself so that you know how to have a better performance. Who knows? She might, if she didn't do that, maybe she wouldn't have been able to get on the beam and do that because it would have ended. She would have broken something, or something would have ended tragically.
Yep.
We don't know, but the fact is like, don't knock someone until you walk in their shoes, which you can't. And everybody's got stuff. And you function despite dysfunction, and quitting is one thing. This isn't quitting when you know yourself and you know that you are protecting yourself. Quitting because you're halfway up a mountain and it's too hard because you're tired is very different. That's quitting.
Yeah.
You don't get 3/4 of the way up to a mountaintop and go, yeah, I can see the top, but yeah, it's just not worth it. That's quitting. and there's no reason not to finish.
Right.
That's quitting. But when you're in the middle of something and you go, oh, this is bad, I'm out of sorts, and I don't think I can do it.
I'm worried about all the 10-year-olds walking up to their dad and going, my head's not in the right space. I don't want to play Little League tonight.
Right, and that's because it's really easy for excuses. But usually, I mean, in those cases, just as an aside, when there's good boundaries and good guidance and all those things in families, you typically don't have quit.
Right.
When you have kids that walk up and say, oh, I just can't make it to the remainder of the top. It's just too hard.
Yep.
That's usually, you've got families that are supporting that it's okay to quit.
Yep.
We'll go get an ice cream.
Yeah. At the minimum, modeling.
There's nothing wrong once in a while with like, you know what, let's go, I use that as a technique sometimes. I'm like, oh, the math is really hard right now. You know what? We just fought for an hour over it. Let's go do something else and come back and do it. But we always come back and do it. We don't just quit and go, forget it.
Right.
Right? So it comes back to parenting.
Yeah.
There's the next show.
Like everything else, yes.
I have so many things to say about that. So next week, because I will be attending an event on my normal taping day or my normal live show, we are going to go live on Monday. We just haven't settled on a time yet, but we will.
It's going to be early.
It's going to be early.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to catch it if you don't want to get up early. You'll be able to catch the show at some other point during the week. But next Wednesday, I will not be going live.
It's going to be a sunrise session.
Yes, I will be going on Monday. And it will be very fun because I got to give my plug because I'm going to have you put this up. I have to raise $10,000 for the New England Patriots Foundation for the Boston Marathon for October 11th. I have now raised $250 of anonymous money came in last week. And I haven't put the link up yet because I haven't had time.
All right.
But I will. I will be at an event with New England Patriots next week. And that's why I will not be here. So, and football season's starting. So
that's right.
It's a big deal. So I will be doing something next week with them. And I will not be here on Wednesday. So please tune in on Monday the 9th. And if not, catch me on all your favorite podcast channels.
Something approaching 8 a.m.
You what?
Something approaching 8 a.m. Maybe a little bit before that.
8 a.m. because I have to get in before this other person I know. Right. So, all right, you guys. So have a great day and put on your daily game face and go out there and go get them. And I'll talk to you next week.